Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's story. After a fateful night together, Diep reveals to James that she is carrying his child. This life-changing news brings both happiness and challenge, as James must leave to face his family's business crisis, while holding on to the promise of returning to build a future with Diep and their baby. Stay with us until the end of the video to discover the joy and emotions when James learns he is going to be a father. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and help us reach our goal of 500 followers. Your support means the world to us. After a fateful night together, Diep reveals to James that she is pregnant with his child. The news shakes him deeply, especially as he faces the urgent duty of saving his family's collapsing companies. Torn between responsibility and love, James promises Diep he will return, no matter how long it takes. She encourages him to stay strong, asking only that he take care of himself and come back to build the family they both dream of. Before leaving, James entrusts his mother to watch over Diep and the house he is building for her. At the airport, every step feels like leaving his heart behind, but her words echo in his mind. Come back to us. Though separated by distance, both hold tightly to hope, the flickering light of love guiding them through uncertainty. Night descended, and the dim glow of the oil lamp painted shifting shadows across Diep's small shed. The air carried a quiet stillness, broken only by the faint clucking of chickens outside. James sat close to Diep, his heart heavy with the weight of decisions he hadn't yet spoken aloud. But tonight felt different. He could sense Diep had something pressing to share, something that reached deeper than the daily talk of markets or chickens. Diep set her hands gently on the table, her eyes glimmering in the flickering light. After a moment of silence, she whispered, "James, there's something I need to tell you before you leave." Her voice trembled, but her gaze stayed steady, as though bracing for the impact of her own words. James leaned closer, his chest tightening. "What is it, Diep? You're scaring me." She took a deep breath, her fingers clutching the edge of her skirt. "I'm pregnant, James. I'm carrying your child." The words landed like a thunderclap in the still night. For a moment, James froze, his mind scrambling to grasp the weight of what she'd said. His breath caught, and his eyes locked onto hers, wide with both fear and wonder. You're pregnant?" His voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming emotion. Diep nodded, her lips pressing together as tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, I found out not long ago. I wanted to tell you sooner, but tonight felt like the right moment. I know you're preparing to leave, but I needed you to know before you go." James's chest rose and fell rapidly. He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly, as if grounding himself to the reality of her confession. "Diep, I don't even know what to say. This changes everything." His voice was thick, his usual composure slipping away. Diep squeezed his hand, her touch gentle yet firm. "I don't want it to change everything, James. I know you have to go. Your father needs you. The company needs you. But I want you to promise me something." James swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Anything. Promise me you'll take care of yourself while you're away. Do your work well. Finish what you need to finish. And then come back to me. Come back to us. We'll be waiting for you." Her voice trembled at the last word, but her determination shone through. James's eyes stung. He brushed a tear from Diep's cheek, his thumb lingering on her skin. "Us. I can't believe it. I was already terrified of leaving you, but now, knowing you're carrying my child." His voice broke, and he pulled her into his arms. Diep pressed her head against his chest, listening to the rapid beat of his heart. "We'll be fine, James. I'll look after myself and our baby. You just need to come back safe." Silence filled the room for a moment, broken only by the faint creak of the oil lamp's flame. James held her as if letting go would mean losing everything. His mind was torn between duty to his family's collapsing business and the new family he was about to build with Diep. The weight was almost unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I wanted to stay tonight, and now more than ever, I don't want to let you out of my sight. But at the same time, I know I have to leave tomorrow. It feels cruel." Diep looked up, her eyes shimmering with both tears and quiet strength. "That's why I'm telling you now, so you won't carry doubt when you leave. You'll carry hope instead. Work hard, do what you must, and then come back. We'll make a home together, raise our child together. Isn't that what you wanted when you started building that house for me?" James closed his eyes, a painful smile spreading across his face. "Yes, that house. I wanted it to be more than just walls and a roof. I wanted it to be a place where you'd feel safe, where we'd laugh, where our children could grow. And now it feels real." Diep brushed her fingers across his face, her touch tender. "Then don't give up, James. Whatever happens with the company, don't let it steal your strength. Think of me, think of our baby, and come back. That's all I ask." James kissed her forehead, lingering there as though trying to imprint her warmth into his memory. "I swear, Diep, no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it gets, I'll come back. For you, for our child." The oil lamp flickered, casting their shadows long across the walls. Outside, the night deepened, the wind rattling the wooden door. But inside, the world felt small and fragile, suspended in the moment of their promise. They sat together, talking softly about the future. Diep imagined holding their child for the first time, and James smiled at the thought, though his heart ached at the possibility of missing those first moments. Still, her words gave him strength. Later, as they lay side by side, James wrapped his arms around her, his hand resting gently on her stomach. "I can't believe there's a life growing inside you, a part of both of us." His voice was hushed, filled with reverence. Diep smiled through her tears, her hand covering his. "That's why you have to take care of yourself out there. Because when you come back, we'll need you. I'll need you. Our baby will need you." James held her tighter, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, where the shadows danced like silent witnesses to their vow. The night outside stretched long and uncertain, but inside that small shed, a fragile hope took root. Tomorrow, the world would demand its price. Tomorrow, James would board a plane, carrying with him the crushing burden of his father's failing empire. But tonight, in the warmth of Diep's embrace, He allowed himself to believe in something greater than duty, something that tied him irrevocably to her and the life they had just begun. The oil lamp sputtered, threatening to go out, but still it clung to its flame, just as they clung to each other. And as James closed his eyes, he whispered one final promise into the darkness. "I'll come back to you, Diep. I'll come back, no matter what." The first light of dawn seeped through the thin curtains, brushing against James's tired eyes. He hadn't slept much. The weight of Diep's revelation and the looming journey pressed heavily on his chest. Still, as he looked over at her hair fanned across the pillow, her breath steady, he felt a fragile sense of peace. He reached out, letting his hand rest gently on her stomach once more, as if reassuring himself that their child was real. But reality called. The open suitcase on the floor reminded him of the hours ahead. His flight, his father's urgent summons, the crumbling companies waiting for his decisions. With a reluctant sigh, he sat up, careful not to wake Diep. He dressed quietly, folding each motion into silence, yet his heart screamed at him not to leave. Diep stirred, her voice soft and drowsy. "James, are you leaving already?" James turned, his chest tightening at the sight of her sleepy eyes. He knelt by her side, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not yet. I wanted to check everything before heading out, but I'll stay a little longer." She pushed herself up, leaning against the wooden headboard. "You don't have to pretend for me. I know you're anxious. Just promise me again, you'll come back." James nodded firmly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his soul. "I swear, Diep, I'll come back to you, to both of you." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she smiled. "Then I'll wait, no matter how long it takes." He kissed her forehead gently before standing. The air inside the shed felt heavy, the weight of parting pressing down on them both. Later that morning, James returned home to find his mother waiting. The living room was dim, though the sun outside had fully risen. His suitcase sat by the door, every corner neatly packed, but his mind was far from tidy. "James," his mother said softly, "did you see Diep?" James nodded, his throat thick. "Yes, she'll be fine. But Mom, she's pregnant." The words startled his mother. Her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth before lowering her hands slowly. "Pregnant? You're going to be a father?" He nodded again, the truth settling into the room like an immovable stone. "Yes, and that's why this is harder than anything I've ever done. Leaving her now feels like tearing my heart apart." His mother stepped forward, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I know, James, but your father needs you. The company needs you. You've always known there would be sacrifices in this family. Still, Diep is strong. She'll wait for you." James's eyes flickered with pain, but also determination. "That's what she said too. She told me to finish the work and come back, and I will. I don't care how long it takes. I'll return to her and our child." His mother's lips trembled, but she gave him a small, proud smile. "Then you must go with a clear heart. Carry her love with you, and let it give you strength." James looked around the house, his gaze lingering on the blueprints for the new home he'd been building for Diep. "Mom, please keep an eye on the construction. Make sure it becomes the home I envisioned for her. I want her and our baby to have a place where they feel safe, even if I can't be here right away." His mother nodded firmly. "You have my word. I'll watch over her. You just focus on surviving this battle." The day moved quickly. Soon, James found himself at the airport, the crowd around him buzzing with motion and chatter. Yet all he could hear was Diep's voice in his mind. "Come back to us." As he waited to board, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through the photos he had of her. The shy smile she gave when he first started building the house. The way her eyes lit up when she fed the chickens. The rare moments when her laughter spilled out like music. Each image cut him deeper, reminding him of what he was leaving behind. His phone buzzed, a message from Diep. "I'm standing by the window. The baby and I are waving goodbye." James's throat closed. He typed back quickly, "I see you in my heart. Take care of yourself. I'll come back soon." The announcement for boarding echoed through the terminal, pulling him from the message. He took a deep breath, gripping his passport and ticket. Every step toward the gate felt like walking away from his very soul. Back at the farm, Diep stood by the small window, her hand resting gently on her belly. She whispered softly, "Your father will return to us. We just have to wait." The wind rattled the wooden frame, but she stayed there, watching the sky as if she could see James's plane cutting through the clouds. Though her eyes filled with tears, her heart held steady. She believed in his promise. Meanwhile, high above the earth, James sat in his seat, staring out at the endless expanse of clouds. His mind was a storm. His father's stern words, the crisis waiting at the company, the suffocating pressure of responsibility. But beneath it all, one truth anchored him. Diep was carrying his child. He wasn't just leaving for business. He was leaving for the future of his family. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "No matter what happens, I'll find my way back to them." The thought became a vow, carved into his very being. Night fell once more, but now the two lovers were separated by distance. Diep lay in her small shed, the oil lamp burning low, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. James sat in a foreign city, exhaustion weighing on him after endless meetings, his phone screen glowing with the last message she had sent. Though apart, their hearts beat in rhythm, connected by promises whispered in the night. For Diep, the days ahead would be filled with waiting, tending the farm, and carrying their child with hope. For James, every decision in the boardroom would carry the echo of her voice, urging him to endure, to survive, and to return. The lamp in Diep's shed flickered against the darkness, just as James's determination burned against the shadows of uncertainty. And though the world seemed intent on pulling them apart, both clung fiercely to the fragile thread of love that bound them together. Their story was no longer just about duty, or even about dreams. It was about a family yet to be born, and the promise of a future worth fighting for.